Welcome back to the Untaming Masculinity podcast. I'm your co-host, Dan. I'm joined by Brad, our other co-host. How's it going, Brad?
I'm good. How are you, man?
Good. Been a good week. How about you?
No complaints over here.
No?
I know your week's good. Want to tell everybody why it's been so good?
Yeah, my week's good. I got a new bow, so I've been playing around with that, getting into the archery game. Decided to extend my hunting season a little bit. So
Rocking your Hoyt hat, looking really
yeah,
fresh.
yeah. You spend a lot of money on a new bow, and they give you a hat, so it's good stuff.
Yeah.
But it's I'm excited. So today I wanted to maybe talk about something that's been on my mind a lot lately, and that is the topic of imposter syndrome. So I want to, dig into that a little bit with you. I figure we can kind of spend some time going over what it is, and then we can talk a little bit about how it's affected both of us individually, and then we can talk about a couple of ways that we have both gone about defeating it. So I'll start with the definition that I found is imposter syndrome is an internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others perceive you to be. Basically, the way I read that is that it is a feeling of not belonging, not being able to do the job to the expectations of others. I can tell you that recently with some leadership roles that I've been put in, that this has been pretty high in my mind. A lot of thoughts of, do I really belong in this position? Am I capable of doing it? Am I going to perform to the expectations of those who put me here? Those have been drifting through my mind a lot. So figure we'd discuss that a little bit. I'm curious with you, because I know you've been going through some changes as well. Have you experienced any of this recently? Have you, or in your past?
Oh, sure. I I I would think a lot of us have imposter syndrome at times, right? I spent a lot of time leading into this discussion thinking about the why, where imposter syndrome comes from, right? Because it is that feeling of inadequacy, like you don't belong, like you don't measure up, that you're somehow a fraud. And when those terms dance around your head, that sort of negative self-talk can be ultimately very toxic. So I spent some time thinking, why? Where does it come from? And I keep getting drawn to this concept of perfectionism that exists in a lot of us, but also our family backgrounds. Regardless of our circumstances, I think most of us come from loving homes, or we have a mom and a dad who cared deeply about us, but there were plenty of times where somehow we didn't measure up. When I grew up, I went to a Catholic school, which was a very interesting experience for me because I wasn't Catholic. It was 15 miles from my house. My parents were fairly poor, and most of the kids going to my school were affluent. So it almost set this expectation of, I don't belong here. I don't measure up. I'm not good enough. And some of that self-talk was, I think, kind of reinforced as I grew up through, no fault to my parents. They were doing the best they could. But sometimes when you start to have those beliefs or see those things in the world, you start to slowly believe it. And that persists throughout time. So I think being drawn to this idea of imposter syndrome, I still deal with it a lot, due to a lot of changes that I've had in my life, personally, professionally. I've been put in positions where I'm either in a leadership role or I'm being groomed for a leadership role. And I know you feel the same way. I kid you not, there are times where you have the skill set to be successful, right? You're obviously being groomed because you have a particular skill set that other people admire. But there's always that nagging voice in the back of your head saying, I'm not good enough. What do people see in me? What am I doing here? You look at those around you and you realize how awesome they are. And it's very easy for you to be very dismissive of of the realization of just how awesome you are as well. So I do think that it's rooted in some of our backgrounds as we grow up, but ultimately it does boil down to this idea of I'm not good enough. Even though I would argue that while you have those thoughts, you also know that you are. So I guess that leads to a question I've been wanting to ask you. You've obviously had some conflicted feelings with this idea of imposter syndrome. If you were to do a self-assessment, do you think that you would find yourself at being an adequate person or more than capable?
So if I take myself and remove myself completely from the situation, and if I was to try and take like an objective look as an outsider at the situation, I think that I would absolutely believe that the person in my position is completely capable of doing the job. But
It's an
it's when you get put in that situation where everything goes to hell in a handbasket mentally, and you start to question yourself, you start to doubt yourself. You're talking about growing up and that effect that it has on you. I was thinking about something that my dad would always say to me as a kid, and he said it for different reasons, but he would always say, think about the worst thing that could happen, and it probably will. And he was saying it in a way to make me think about, you know he started saying it a lot when I started dating. So he was talking about getting girls pregnant and all of that stuff. But he said it a lot, growing up, and it was for a good reason. It was like, listen, be prepared for the consequences. But I think that instilled this sense of impending doom in me that has been hard to shake for a long time. Despite the fact that, like you said, when you get put in a leadership position, people don't put you or groom you for a leadership position because they don't think you can do the job. You're in that phase and then put in that position because people believe in you and you've done something to gain that trust. So it's this big dichotomy of thought process where the rest of the world is looking at you going, dude, you got this. You're good to go. And meanwhile, you're sitting there going, we'll see.
I think about this a lot. It's a dichotomy, a huge one, because something about me that's interesting, and I guarantee you probably felt the same way at times too, is there's a certain level of confidence and brashness I have within myself. There's this idea that I understand that I'm intelligent, that I am strong, that I'm this, that, or the other. I feel those things. And sometimes that confidence can get irrational to the point of critiquing myself against others and feeling that I'm superior to them. It's total shit. I know, but it happens. I think we're all guilty of it. But at the same time, there's this dichotomy of I'm inadequate, I'm not good enough. And that's what's so interesting and fascinating to me about imposter syndrome is I feel this way about certain things and that I'm confident, that I'm brash, that I'm arrogant, that I'm brazen even at times. And then here on the other hand, I'm some meek little sheep. It's it's fascinating.
So the things that you're confident about, right, and that you're brash about, are those things that you've done a lot?
I mean, usually, I mean, there are certain
Right.
traits or
Right.
things that
So
I've worked
so
on.
you've got a proven track record of being successful here. The things where you have the imposter syndrome, they're relatively new in your life, right?
Not always.
Really?
So, I mean, I've been married for almost 10 years, and there are times I feel like I have imposter syndrome with my wife. So, I gotta
All
mute
right.
for a second. But to your broader point, yeah. I mean, it's generally things where you're being introduced to a new environment, a new position, you're trying something new for the first time. Generally speaking, that's where that comes from.
Yeah, and my point to that was you build confidence through execution, right? You you the act of doing and then succeeding breeds confidence and removes that imposter syndrome feeling.
Yeah, I mean, that's
You
a
agree
really
with
good
that?
point. To, I guess, as a follow-up question to that, do you think that that's how much success or how much time would you argue that you need for something like that to take root?
That's a good question, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it also depends on the success you have. If you have a large success immediately, then you've probably got a better chance of having that imposter syndrome feeling go away quicker than if you have either no successes or very small successes over, in the beginning. You're still kind of proving to yourself that, yeah, okay, I can kind of do it, but when things get really hectic, am I going to be able to handle it? You know,
You said something very interesting. You talked about proving it to yourself. I think there's something there, right? It's not just this concept of I'm just going to keep going at it and keep going at it, and eventually it'll click. I do think that there is a certain element of proving that to yourself. And what that suggests to me, leading into some of the other stuff we wanted to talk about, is that requires a little bit of humility, right? You have to have this idea of, I'm going to prove this to myself, but I also have to accept that I'm not going to be an expert at it. Like case in point, you just bought a bow. You shot it for the first time today. You're not stepping in, firing those arrows thinking, I'm a pro, I'm going to campaigns this, launch some stuff from 100 yards. That it's a process. It takes time, but it also requires a certain level of humility that you don't necessarily have it figured out. And I think with humility comes a certain level of self-awareness that you don't have it figured out. But at the same time, you are in a position because you're meant to be there.
I would agree with that. And what I would add to that is that confidence breeds confidence, right? So I've been fortunate in that I've had a lot of successes in my life over the last couple of years, in all aspects of my life. And where I would typically walk into a situation be like, I'm new at this, I'm gonna suck. And then I would suck. I actually walked into the bow thing with a lot of humility because yeah, I've shot a bow a couple times in the past, but never like it's never been my thing. But I walked in, I said, maybe this is something I'm actually going to be good at. So let me go in with no expectation and just, you know, follow the steps, listen to the people who are here to help guide me and see what I can do. And I mean, I'm not shooting, an apple off somebody's head, but
Yet,
I was putting
yet.
yet, but I was putting pretty good groups together today. So what I'm getting at there is the confidence you build by getting put in situations where you don't think you can perform or don't know how you're going to perform, and having success in those situations breeds success the next time you go into new situations. So I feel like as time has gone on over the last 2 years, even though I still experience imposter syndrome, I feel like the amount of it that I experience at every new venture is decreased. That courage increases, that confidence increases, and that feeling of inadequacy or doubt it decreases. It'll never go away. I'll always be questioning myself every time I try something new, but I feel like I'm allowing myself to have the potential to succeed more than I have in the past.
Could I make the argument that it's a good thing that imposter syndrome never fully go away? I find there to be a certain level of value that comes from always being at least slightly uncomfortable. If we're comfortable, we're not pushing ourselves. And if you are still feeling slightly inadequate, that's going to lead to a little bit of humility. That's going to lead to a little bit of discomfort. And those types of discomforts, for lack of a better word, to me lead to action. You're going to be better. You're going to take the necessary steps to be the best that you can be. So I would venture to say having a little bit of imposter syndrome is not a bad thing. It's just knowing how to wield it.
Yep. And the key word you said there was humility, right? I believe that imposter syndrome imparts a certain humbleness into you. And I think that guys who are concerned about succeeding, or high achieving guys, um, they're that way because they enter new situations with a sense that I have the ability to succeed, but I'm going to be humble and learn first. The guys who go in and have the fake it till you make it mentality, or the I don't need any help mentality, they're usually the guys who crash and burn. So I'm not saying that you have to be meek about the situation, and quite the opposite. You're put there for a reason, or you're doing this for a reason, so own it. But having a little bit of humility in the situation definitely benefits you overall, because being able to admit to the people that are around you that, hey, listen, I'm new to this situation. I'm here. I'm going to do the job. I'm going to perform the act, but I'm going to need your help too in certain areas, because there's stuff that I don't know. There's stuff that I can't do yet. And with your help, I'll be able to get there, and we'll be able to do this, we'll be able to complete this goal, whatever it is. And I'm trying to talk in broad terms because there's so many different things that this could apply to.
Yeah. So I think we're in agreement. Humility, be humble.
Yes.
That's huge. That's key. What else do you think we can do when we're dealing with imposter syndrome to address it, to attack it?
Well, like I said, the humility kind of goes hand in hand with asking questions, right? I know that me personally, I'll give it for instance. I just took over a position this last July, um, working on the other side of the business. I'd always been on the engineering and project management side of the business. Now I'm on the manufacturing side of the business. I know how the products work. I know how they're designed. I know how they go together. I know the vendors, all that stuff. But I don't necessarily know the ins and outs of the business processes on the manufacturing side, how work orders are set up, how we run our system in certain areas, that kind of thing. And I went in very humble and just asking questions. Hey, listen, this is going to be part of my job now, part of my responsibility. But the shop floor tech who's been here for 6 years, you're the subject matter expert on how this all goes together, boots on the ground style. So why don't you tell me how this all works from your perspective? I can take that information and start to integrate it into my processes, my procedures, my outlook on the business. And by integrating those people, I mean, this gets into leadership too, but by integrating those people into your learning process, you're building relationships, you're showing that you're willing to learn and that you're willing to be led a little bit. And it shows that you're not the guy coming in being like, I know it all, I'm going to rule the world, you know. So I'm kind of steering away a little bit from the imposter syndrome side of it, but it goes hand in hand with building a team, building a community, and learning your role, and defeating that imposter syndrome. You're getting the feeling that you belong there and you belong in that role.
So I have a really interesting imposter syndrome real life scenario. I mean, obviously, you laid out a really good work scenario. I've got several of those, but in relation to asking questions and being curious, which I think is a really key point. I believe I mentioned on a previous episode that I've started jujitsu.
Mm-hmm.
And for anybody who's done jujitsu, you show up in a gym, you haven't ever done a class before. There are guys in there who've been doing it 2 years, 7 years, 9 years. They're doing all kinds of moves. They're talking to you about what a K guard is and a Hiba, and you're just hearing these terms you've never heard before. You're like, what? I know what a guillotine is from UFC. I don't know what these guys are talking about or how they go about doing it. But as you get in, the key to something like jujitsu is they're not setting aside a time. setting time aside for you to just catch up. You've got to learn it on the fly. And what that means is there's a certain level of humility because you're going to get your ass kicked repeatedly.
Hmm.
But through all of that, what anybody who's done jujitsu will tell you is there are a lot of guys who will show up for a few months, they'll quit. They'll get frustrated because their ego gets in the way. They can't figure it out. They're not getting better because it takes time. Most guys who will do it will tell you it's going to take you close to a year to feel competent. But those who are successful keep coming back by demonstrating humility, but they also ask questions. They're curious. And that curiosity really portends to being able to grow and evolve into that. Like when I first showed up, I felt insanely inadequate. Like I was completely out of my depth and it was a little terrifying. The first couple of times I went, it was very scary to actually go because I knew that those guys were really good and I suck and they were going to kick my ass. But by going in and being curious and being willing to learn, yeah, I suck, but I'm growing. I'm better now than I was a month ago.
Hmm.
And I enjoy it. I look forward to going because there's a challenge. And while I know I'm still new and sometimes I still feel as if I'm a bit of an imposter, that curiosity, that humility, that foreknowledge that, yeah, this is going to be hard, but I'm building towards something. And every single one of those guys was once in my shoes. I think that that's one thing we lose sight of when we get stuck in this mindset of being an imposter, is that every single person on this earth, regardless of who they were, evolved and grew into what they are now.
Yep.
You could be standing next to the CEO of your company and feel intimidated by him. That CEO probably had some internship doing XYZ out of college and worked his way up. Nobody's gotten to where they are without that work, and that work requires a certain level of humility. It requires a certain level of curiosity, being able to ask questions and being willing to not only ask questions, but to be receptive to the answers that you receive.
I would also add, though, in that situation, you're being humble, you're asking questions, but you're also providing value, right? You're
Oh yeah,
showing up. You're now an additional training partner that's available for them to work on. You're the new guy who now, listen, we all know that one of the best ways to really master something is to teach it. So now you're the new guy and they can start imparting wisdom on it and they can go, I know nothing about jujitsu, but they can show you a particular move. And then as they're talking through it with you, they can start to see why it really works to a different extent in their mind. I know I've
yeah,
experienced this with like outdoor stuff and whatnot, teaching people skills. It's like, oh, that, yeah, okay, now I'm putting these pieces together at my level, even though I'm teaching somebody maybe down here. And your presence alone provides value to the situation.
yeah. Like, how do you think that works professionally?
I think professionally, it's just the same thing. Like I mean, for me, I'll use an example again with the new position. I came in, I was humble, I started asking questions, and then the guys would be like, "Oh, we have a problem here, we have a problem here, this, that, and the other." I'm like, "Well, what about if we just make this change, or what about if I get purchasing to buy these tools for you?" And I provide a little bit of value in just a couple of areas and kind of grease the skids, smooth out some road bumps, whatever it is. And now all of a sudden you're providing value to the process and you're showing that you're there for a reason. You're also building the confidence in yourself that, hey, yeah, I am here for a reason. I can see these issues. I can help the process. I can help the team. I can help build the organization, whatever the dynamic is. But by adding value, it helps prove to yourself that you have what it takes to succeed in that position.
Can I tell a story about you?
Absolutely. I guess I can
All
always
right,
edit it
let's
out if
do
it's
this.
bad.
No, this story is gonna be incredible. So, in relation to providing value, as you were telling that, I was drawn to the event that we went to in Maine. So essentially, what that was, just for everybody so that you know, is Ryan Mickler's Order of Man movement had an event that Ryan put together at his home in Maine, in central Maine. And I've talked to Dan most every day for almost 2 years now. And this was last October. I'd never met him. And a big group of us got together. There were 100 men. There were 7 men from our battle team that we've referenced before. And while we talked to each other, there had been, I think Dan had met one other guy on the team, and that was it.
Maybe. Yeah.
So we went to the situation where here are guys we talk to all the time, and we're going to be surrounding ourselves with these high-level guys. We've never met anybody. It's intimidating. Like that imposter syndrome kicks in big time. And we showed up. And the thing that really hit me is while I felt like an imposter, I realized I was among equals. These guys were great men doing great things, but I also was a great man doing great thing. And one of the biggest examples of somebody who came in with quite a bit of imposter syndrome, but it was very eye-opening on a personal level for him, was you. You know, we talked, I think it was the last day we were there, about how you came in feeling as if you were an imposter. You didn't know what sort of value you could provide, what kind of guy you were going to be amongst just awesome, accomplished men. And you spent that entire weekend not only being a stalwart, but holding court, having great conversations, asking great questions. Guys there were looking up to you for how you performed, how you showed up, and how you led. And that was through providing value despite how you might have felt inside. And obviously, that weekend led to a lot of growth within the Iron Council for you individually, because you went and you provided value despite how you might have felt internally.
I appreciate that, because that was the weekend where I really kind of latched onto this idea of imposter syndrome, because I'd always felt it before in my life, but I think we actually had a discussion on a larger scale within the IC during one of the breakout sessions about imposter syndrome. But it really, the light bulb kind of clicked to me, like, because I went into that weekend going, you know, am I going to be able to keep up with these guys physically? Am I going to be able to keep up with them from a mindset standpoint, from a mental standpoint, that kind of thing? You know, just where am I going to be in the pecking order? You know, and I've had failures that weekend for sure. There was a lot of guys that I wanted to shake their hand and introduce myself to, and I failed that. There's a lot of guys who I did shake their hand and introduce myself to. But in general, I had the same takeaway as you. You know, we're all just guys, right? People are not as intimidating as they can be. Situations are not as intimidating as they seem. And in that particular situation, I think I walked away from that weekend realizing doesn't matter who you were, we were all there for relatively the same reason, right? And we all had our baggage, we all had our deficiencies, but we all brought something to the table. We wouldn't have been there if we weren't. And it was kind of an eye-opening moment for me. But I appreciate the compliment. I thought in general, the group that we were with showed a lot of leadership and had a lot of heart that weekend. So it was kind of a special weekend, I think. But
True story. All right. So far we've covered being humble, asking questions, providing value.
yep.
So what else is out there? What else do you think we can do?
Yeah, the next thing that comes to mind for me is you were put there for a reason. You know, I mentioned it earlier in the podcast, but you know, you do not end up in the pipeline for any kind of leadership or higher level role because people think you're going to fail. You know, in the work world, that would be a financial folly to put somebody in a leadership role where they are expected to fail. in other settings, it's you don't want people in charge or leading that are incapable of doing so. So if somebody is grooming you for that position or has groomed you for that position and put you in it, it means that there are people, there's a person minimum, and probably people plural, that have faith in your abilities and that your ability has been proven to somehow or another. So use that as a way to build a little bit of confidence. Keep the humility, ask the questions, bring value, but also have the confidence to know that, damn it, I'm here because I've shown somebody something.
Yeah.
You may not even know what it is, but you've done that, and own that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really, really good point. I mean, from a professional setting, I'm dealing with that right now through work. I'd gotten a message from an executive vice president of my company. He said, "Hey, Brad, call me. Here's my cell phone number," just via Slack one day. Like, what the hell? Why does
Oh,
someone want to call him on a cell phone number? And I called him and he was really excited. And he said, "Brad, we're going to have you in a leadership training cohort. There are 15 people across the company we've identified as future leaders within our organization, and you're one of them. We're going to invest a lot in you." And that was humbling to hear, right? Me, just some dude having this incredible opportunity because somebody saw something in me. And at the same time, it doesn't necessarily just show itself out when it comes to work. If you feel like you're an imposter at home, if you feel like you're an imposter amongst your friends, or if you started some new hobby and you feel like you're an imposter, there's a reason you're doing it. There's a reason that the woman you married chose you. There's a reason that you have the friends that you have. Whatever that looks like, you're there for a reason, because at some point, somewhere along the line, somebody chose you. And it's easy to forget that. But if you really take a step back and look through the lens of somebody else, they see tremendous value in you.
So the part of this that I toy with, and I have a little bit of hesitation, is you have to appreciate the fact that somebody else has faith in you, but you cannot take your personal value from their evaluation of you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You have to have confidence in yourself.